It's been 11 years, and I still remember my first day of teaching. I was so excited. I did up the bulletin board, and like any new teacher, I overstocked on stationery. I had all my learning materials prepared. And when I mean prepared, I mean everything was made accessible for all my students. Obviously, I was very enthusiastic. The first half of the day was great. As soon as my students came in, we introduced ourselves, we were laughing, but obviously some learning had to take place. We started with literacy development, then transitioned to numeracy skills, and ended the day with my least favorite, arts and crafts. As I went around the classroom and started passing around one of the pre-cut materials, I saw one of my students started sulking. She said to me, "Miss Ayu, you did the favorite part of my activity. I love cutting." I just stood there, embarrassed. My student has cerebral palsy. Her report stated that her fine motor skills were weak, but it didn't say she couldn't cut. I just assumed that someone with weak fine motor skills would not be able to cut. It never crossed my mind that she may like the activity or she may be able to complete the task. We all know what I'm getting at. We all know that feeling of discrimination. We all know that feeling of judgment. And I did just that. I was too quick to judge what my student with cerebral palsy can and cannot do. Let me take you through my journey from a young, enthusiastic teacher without much formal education or experience in the field to today, where I'm in a position to advocate for the importance of inclusion and to share how disability does not mean inability. Growing up, my understanding of disability was that people with disabilities could not participate in everyday activities like the rest of us. Years later, through my work with people with disabilities, I realized that in fact, my understanding was just a perception, my perception of disability. It wasn't exactly what disability was about. It was through my work with people with disabilities that taught me that just because someone has a disability does not mean that they cannot do something. In 2019, we, the UAE Special Olympics Committee, hosted the World Games in Abu Dhabi, where 7,500 determined athletes represented not only their countries, but their individual journeys. They represented their struggles, but they also represented their successes. But most of all, they all stood together to demonstrate to the world that despite their disabilities, they also had exceptional abilities that allowed them to compete on a global platform. Individuals with Down syndrome, who are often thought to have limited intellectual skills, pitched their projects for funding. Individuals with cerebral palsy, who are often thought to have limited fine motor skills, competed in sports like archery. And individuals with autism, who are often thought to have limited social skills, work together in team-building activities. These athletes used the platform they were given to challenge the misconception that people like myself once had on disability, to show to the world that we need to look beyond a person's disability or diagnosis to see what they are capable of. Let us now go back to the student I spoke about earlier, the one who enjoyed the cutting activities despite her diagnosis of cerebral palsy. I was so quick to judge my student, which led me to limit an opportunity of improving her fine motor skills. In essence, I had restricted her development. This student helped me change my approach to seeing disability. After that day, I never completed any of the tasks for any of my students solely based on their diagnosis. I was mindful to create experiences and opportunities for each of them to learn and to develop as individuals. But even outside the classroom, how many times do we as a society quickly judge people with disabilities and decide for ourselves what their capabilities are? It is only when we let our own perception of someone's disability instead of our own understanding of their abilities that dictate the opportunities that are given to them. And that restricts their growth. And this doesn't just limit opportunities to learn, but to work, to being in relationships, to being members of our society, and most of all, to live a fulfilled life. And that is key. It's only when we provide people with disabilities opportunities to cultivate the skills that they do have that we will enable them to grow. And this will help shape their future and open up a world of possibilities for them. Equipped with lessons from my first year of teaching, I changed my outlook on disabilities and my teaching approach. At the end of my second year, one of my students gave me a letter. I read the letter and I immediately started crying. The letter read, "To the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may be the world. Thank you for believing and helping me." You see, sometimes you can never really measure the impact you can have on someone by simply focusing on their abilities instead of limiting them because we look at their disability. By looking beyond my students' diagnosis and differentiating their coursework as per their abilities, I was able to push my students to higher levels of achievement. I am so proud to share with all of you that I have taught students who are now employed as chefs, motivational speakers, brand ambassadors, employed at banks and hotels. And for those students who are not employed, they're taking fulfilling hobbies such as horse riding and modeling. I still have the letter. It motivates me every day. Let us now take a look at why we're so quick to make judgments about the capabilities of people with disabilities. I've come to realize for many of us, it is perhaps lack of awareness. It may be lack of knowledge of diagnosis, or it may be lack of understanding how to interact with people with disabilities. In any case, while meaning well, we sometimes as a society are too quick and sometimes dismiss people with disabilities because they are different. During a parent-teacher conference, a mother once shared with me that her son was being made fun of by his friends because he has a sister with Down syndrome who was my student. The mother asked me if I could do something about it. My suggested solution was to perhaps speak to the school counselor or the class teacher. She said no. She asked me if I could speak to her son, educate him on his sister's diagnosis, and help him manage the situation, not just for today, but for the future. I did just that. I had a few sessions with her son. I educated him on his sister's capabilities, the history behind her diagnosis, to which she responded really well to. A year later, the boy's mother shared how her son's friends no longer made fun of the boy or his sister. In fact, they apologized and asked how his sister was doing. And whenever they came over, they were friendly and they were respectful towards her. You see, the mother didn't want her son's friends to deal with the consequences of bullying. She instead wanted them to be educated and help spread awareness about her daughter's disability. In this case, education and awareness led to these children accepting someone who was different. So, as you can see, as children, we aren't conditioned to discriminate. No one is born with the mindset that disability means inability. It is something that is a learned behavior. And that's why it's important that we work towards eliminating this negative mindset and help build a culture of acceptance and inclusion where opportunities can be provided. It's only when we provide opportunities for people with disabilities to assimilate within our society that we are able to move towards inclusion. But what is inclusion, you may ask? Inclusion is a sense of belonging. Belonging to a community, to a workplace, to a group of friends. But having a sense of belonging is not just when people invite you, but it's the act of acceptance as well. And that's something we all seek. We all want to belong, regardless of our differences. Now, you all must be wondering, why should you care? Besides the obvious idealist reason of treating all people with equality, there is a more realist reason why you should care about the inclusion of people with disabilities. 15% of the world's population are diagnosed with some type of disability, whether it be from birth, caused by old age, whether it be a physical impairment, an invisible disability, or a short-term injury. Disability can happen to anyone. So by promoting a culture of acceptance and kindness towards people with disabilities and providing them opportunities to thrive in our society, we will not only create a better world for people with disabilities, but for humanity as a whole. To sum things up, people with disabilities, they don't need it easy. They just need possibilities. And that is created from acts of inclusion from us as a society. Opportunities create possibilities. And it is only when we look beyond the generalizations of people's diagnosis and see them as individuals and focus on their abilities that we can help create these opportunities. This will create a more inclusive society which will promote values of empathy and understanding. So, together, instead of focusing and dwelling on what we cannot do, let's all focus on what we can do. Thank you.